this morning, and I thank you that we have the opportunity to come together and learn present truth. I pray that your Spirit is with us now, and that we understand the matters that are conveyed, and I pray that you be with our presenter, and that you give him an extra dose of your Holy Spirit as he gives this message today, and I ask this in Jesus' name, amen.
On my return from Brazil, I purposed to relook at Daniel chapter 2, and I started doing that by just recapping the visions in the book of Daniel, chapter 2, 7, 8 and 11. And the contention that I'm making is that in Daniel 2, from verses 41 to 43, when it talks about this clay, it's talking about a clay that's in a relationship with the iron. And I said that this was a parallel verse to 8:12, where we pick up the phrase transgression of desolation. So the reason there's a transgression going on in 8:12 is because the church has come into a relationship with the state. There's a church-state relationship. Then we had some discussion about the history of verse 12. I don't know if people have looked at it or come to a settled position on what verse 12 is teaching. And it's centered around the word against, when a host is given to the papacy against the daily. And so we had some discussion about that, but I'm placing that as the history of Clovis giving his arms to the papacy. We know that happens in 596, but then when it says he's going to, for the purpose of making war against the daily, I'm placing that at 508. So that was the discussion we had in verse 12. Then we went into verse 31. Now we've discussed 1131. We've discussed 1131 a few times, but yesterday we went into it in a bit more depth, and I gave an explanation of what verse 31 is teaching. So maybe if we just read verse 31 again, and then I'm going to ask somebody to give me their understanding of what verse 31 is teaching, either their own personal one or what we taught in class. I don't mind which. So who's going to read? Brother Tabo, could you read verse 1131?
Daniel 11, verse 31. An arm shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate.
What I want to try and keep on reiterating is the information that I'm giving is my understanding of these verses, and because of the discussion that we're having in Daniel 2, which is now spilling over to Revelation 17, some things that you and I may have understood before may be incorrect. So I'm hoping that when I make something write something on the board and I write dates, names, places, that you're not just writing them down and saying, that is the established correct position. That's my understanding of what that's where I want to start these classes. Is that's how I understand it. So if at the end of the day, in the evenings when you're doing your studies, if you just close your notes up and think, well, we'll wait for the next class tomorrow and move on, I think you're viewing this issue in the wrong way. There's still, I don't think, a settled position amongst people in this movement about what Daniel 2 is teaching, not just with respect to the iron and clay. There's other pieces that I don't think we have consensus on. So when we come to these passages, we may or may not have an agreement on that. So if I ask Brother Jonathan what he thinks verse 31 is saying, either he's going to go back to his notes and say this is what we taught in class, or he may have a different view. So what did we say that verse 31?
Daniel
11:31. So we read 11:31.
Yeah, it is that the papacy has an alliance with pagan Rome, and that they're using the pagan powers or the pagan army to pluck up these three other horns. And wait a second. And they shall pollute the sanctuary is the city of Rome.
So where have we placed that? The pollution of the sanctuary of strength.
I would put it in 330.
Okay. Does anybody have a different view of that? Because that's what we discussed in class. We're placing that at 330. Then the next.
I'm not so sure if I'm settled
Okay.
in this view, but one view I think that we were upholding on this is that this could mean just the destruction of Rome.
In a generic sense, sort of over a
Generic
period of time.
sense, yes.
Okay.
When the different tribes were let in and started to conquer. Yes, the barbarian tribes.
Okay.
But they would at the same time become the arms of Rome.
Okay. So you can either look at this as when we look at this verse, it covers history. So we know it's not just specifically a point in time. It's covering the sacking of Rome from various perspectives. Either the barbarian tribes are going to destroy it, or Rome itself destroys it. But I've looked at a specific date, 330 AD, because I'm understanding verse 31 is showing how Rome, now in the time of the papacy, is going to rise up to its rulership of the world in 538 AD. So that's why I've seen the first part of that verse is 330. The second part, he should take away the daily sacrifice.
Yeah, this is the understanding of take away.
Okay, so explain that a little bit, because this is critical about the explanation of what takeaway means.
Yeah, one is to lift up. I guess this is room. Means you have something and you lift it up, and the other is sir. This means literally to take it away, to destroy. And as far as I know, Daniel 11:31, this takeaway is room, so the paganism is lifted up.
In verse 31?
Yeah.
So in verse 31 it's sir.
Ah, okay.
In verse 31 it's sir. So here, these pagan powers are going to take away the daily sacrifice. They're going to sir or throw away this daily, whatever that daily is, paganism.
When I was reading Daniel and the Revelation by Uriah Smith, he actually had a nice way of putting it. When he discussed in verse 31 specifically, because that's the transfer between. Sorry, I placed the camera. When he had to transfer, when this is the first verse in Daniel 11 that it transferred from paganism to the papacy. So he said, in all actuality, when it was taken away, it was exalted and lifted up, because paganism, the papacy is paganism baptized.
And that's part of the problem, that I don't think some of the pioneers looked at those verses and understood them in the way that we understand them, because he says that this is basically paganism dressed up in Christian garb and it's exalted.
Yeah.
But the way we understand that word take away is different. It's different to its usage in chapter 8 verse 11. And so I understand that 11:31 is the same verse as 12:11, and in 12:11 I think he's straight on that it's the warfare between Clovis and the Visigoths in the year 508. So coming back to this word take away is to destroy or to cast away something. So we know that the arms that stand on the papacy's part are going to take away paganism. They're going to destroy it in some shape or form. And it's the same. It's almost the same wordage, same usage that you find in Daniel 12:11. And in Daniel 12:11, why do we mark that as 508? Because of the 1290. Because in 12:11, so someone read 12:11.
And from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days.
So we've got the 1290, and the logic that Smith and the other pioneers use is that the end date is the same as the 1260. So you have 1260 and 1290. And we know the 1260 is 538. Hence they say that this is 508. When you go back into history, you know that in 508 there's a war between the Franks or Clovis and the Visigoths, and it lasts between 507 and 508. And they mark 508 in that verse here as the subjugation of the Visigoths. And what we're going to do is we're going to link verse 11 when it says take away, because that is Sir in that verse, with the same take away in 1131. So we're going to make 1131 and 1211 parallel passages. And we're going to do that with the phrase take away. So we understand the connection between the two verses, how we're going to connect them. And I don't think Smith does it in this way. I don't think he has the visibility, or he hasn't seen the connection of this word take away, how it runs through these verses, and in particularly into chapter 8, verse 11. So whilst we would agree that papalism is paganism dressed up, I don't think that this verse teaches that. And then the last part of the verse, it says, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. And we're saying that that is 538. I just want to check something in chapter 12, one of my notes. So just going back to verse, so in 1131 it says place. So step 3 says place. And what do we see in chapter 12 verse 11 to parallel that? What word would we pick up? Set up. That's what I've seen. I've seen place is set up. So maybe someone might venture to paraphrase chapter 12 verse 11. Is someone willing to sort of give a paraphrase version of what's happening there?
They're talking about the pride.
So they're talking about,
Pride.
where do you see that in verse 11?
This is 12:11.
Yeah, we're looking at 12:11. What we've done is, in 1131, we've connected the term take away with verse 31 and verse 11, with connecting the word take away. Then the last part of the verse, in verse 31, says place. There's a series of activities that are happening, and he ends up with placing the abomination that maketh desolate. And in 12:11 it says set up. So how would you... Anybody want to venture?
From the time that the Visigoths were taken away by Clovis in 407, 408,
5.
You're 5, yeah.
Oh, sorry,
yeah.
4.
We know what you mean, 5, yeah.
507, 508. And the papacy was starting to rise up and shall be 12, 90 years.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable. I find it nice if you when you get these Bible verses, which in the King James are sometimes complex, it's just to rewrite it out in your own words, and I find that really useful.
Just wanted to say that we have to understand that they were not literally taking away the Visigoths.
Yes,
They
could
were
you explain that
actually
for us? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, clarify. Just explain a bit of that,
I'll say
because some people.
507 there was a war between the Ostrogoths. They came against Clovis, and in this war, their king was killed by Clovis. So the Visigoths, who were family with the Ostrogoths, they came to help the Ostrogoths, and they defeated Clovis. And then they had a pause because of the winter time, and the war should continue in 508. But in 508, the Visigoths they won against Clovis. But instead of like continue to destroy them or whatever, they offered a peace in 508. And this peace treaty, we understand, marks the end of all resistance of the Arian forces against Catholic forces. From this point onward, there's no more resistance, and what in the last version of Vera's book, what they have put in there is that from that point on, the papacy had freedom to develop without any military hindrance or resistance. So in a spiritual sense, they were removed, but they were actually still there.
So sometimes there's confusion on this issue. When it says take away the daily, we think sometimes that's to do with the 3 horns that were plucked up, the Heruli, Ostrogoths and Vandals, but it's not. They're 2 separate things that are going on at the same time. So who takes those 3 horns down? I speak that loud because I hear people. Did you say?
Yesterday you said something about the Byzantine Empire.
Yeah, it's the Byzantine Empire, pagan Rome in the east, the Eastern Roman Empire. They exclusively take down the 3 horns, and Clovis isn't involved in that work. And the reason why I mention that is because in verse 31, you can see when it says they, in the last part of the verse, are going to place the abomination makers desolate. So we're marking that at 538. So the army that's doing that isn't the same army that's doing the second part of that verse when it says take away their daily. They're 2 different people who are doing that. One is Clovis and one is Justinian. They're 2 different people, 2 different kings, 2 different nations, but they're all considered to be the arms that stand on his part. But at one level, it's all Rome. We want to understand that it's all Rome at one level, but they're not necessarily the same people. So verse 31 for me is covering the rise of the papacy from its inception, if we can use that word, in 330 AD, right to 538, when it's going to begin to rule supremely for 3.5 times. Sister Alison.
You said in verse 31 it's sir, right?
Yes.
And sir means literal.
So it doesn't mean literal. So let's go through this again then, to refresh our minds. I just gave this graphic of a table, and there's 2 pieces of paper on it. One's a dollar bill, and one's just some tissue, okay, that's been used. And you're told to take away these items. So when you take away this tissue, you will sear this tissue. You're going to throw it away into a dustbin. But the dollar bill, I just gave the kind of graphic that you're going to put it into your handbag because it has value. And this is room. So what we're trying to see is that when the word take away is used in the book of Daniel, that you have these 2 concepts or ideas. They're both taken away, but it depends what it is. So in verse 31, it's this tissue. It's something that needs to be disposed of, that is of no value to the person who's getting rid of it. But in this one, when it's room, then it has some value. And the reason it's being taken away is because it's almost like someone who's stealing something or robbing something. So this is 811 and this is 1131 and 12:11. So we really need to have that concept fixed, riveted in our minds, that there's these two words and what they mean, because they both mean to take away, but they have these subtle differences. And it's an understanding of if it's sur a room that allows us to go into verse 31 and explain what's happening. So 11:31 we've tied up take away, which is sur, with 12:11, and then we've tied up the word place and set up to mean the same thing. So in 12:11, my kind of paraphrase goes something like this. So this is 12:11, and from the time that the daily shall be taken away in 508, in order that the abomination that makes God's people desolate is able to be set up 30 years later in 538. So the reason it's taken away in 508 is in order that it can be set up 30 years later. So you have these 30 years of preparation. So when you're explaining this to people, you need to see the distinction in verse 11 between these three sections. There's going to be a taken away, and the reason it's taken away is in order that it can be set up, and then it's going to have this 1290-year prophecy attached to it, where it's taken away in order that it can be set up. Taken away in order that it can be set up and then rule for 1260. So that's verse 12. Any questions on that?
So, how can we match it when 8:11 is room?
Okay, so 8:11 we haven't gone into, and Sister Bronwyn asked, can we go through the word daily in those 5 verses in the book of Daniel, the 5 places it comes up? I said maybe we wouldn't, but I think maybe we will, because it may have some relevancy to what we're doing. Three places in the book, in chapter 8, and then, so we've done 2 of them already. 2 of the places where we're looking at the word daily in the book of Daniel, we've tackled so far, and the daily in these 2 verses I'm suggesting is the struggle between Clovis and the Visigoths in 508, where this pagan resistance is put to an end. And another nice point that both Smiths and other pioneers identify almost consistently is in 508, it marks that not only are the Visigoths basically going to go into some, agreement or truce with Clovis, but also the last of the 7 horns of Daniel 7 switch over from pagan to a papal religion, and that last horn is in the United Kingdom, and it's King Arthur.
Are you sure?
Am I sure that's correct?
Or you're saying this is what they said?
Yeah, they say it pretty consistently.
Yeah, they say it, but it's not correct.
I don't know if it's correct, but they
This
do
is
say
where I
that.
Smith.
No, I think Arthur was in a different century or something.
And then all I'm going to say on top of that is, if you try and search this history out, it's virtually impossible. They have this historical source, I can't remember the name of it, but it's not only Smith that's doing this. This goes right back to the pioneer understanding, when I think it's Litch that's going through these passages. He says the same. So Uriah Smith hasn't invented this. He's just repeating what the pioneers were teaching. So it's part of the pioneer logic that in 508, the last of the 7 horns come over to the papacy. If you go into secular history, most people will say that King Arthur is a totally different thing. He might be even a fictitious character. So I'm inclined to believe it, to be honest. I quite like that. The pioneers believed it, but you have to make your own decision. I've seen you had just one more point I want to make. Part of the issue when we first started, and we were talking about 538, 536 BC. Remember 538, 536 BC, where we're talking about Cyrus and Darius and all of that issue. One of the things that comes up in that discussion is the date 538 here. So 538 is on the chart. Now, if you go back into the Pioneer writings and understand where they got the date 538 from, it's from a Greek historian called, it's not Herodias, but it's, how do you pronounce it? Herodotus, something like that. Herodotus, we'll go with that. And he gives, most people explain him as a really colourful historian, which means he has a lot of poetic license in his writings, and they don't trust his reliability. For one reason, he's writing about history that's 200 years in the past when he writes it, so he's not even living in that history, and they don't think that what he's writing is historically accurate, because they're going to go into history, go into these clay tablets and work out all these archaeological facts and work out that he's wrong. So every secular historian today will tell you that 538 is wrong, and it actually happens. They'll even give you the day. I think it's like 13th of October, 539 BC. So there's a discrepancy between what the pioneers teach and what most secular historians teach today. And the reason there's a difference is because the source that they're getting their facts from. So the pioneers didn't come up with these dates, just on their own understanding. They went back into history books, and that's where they get this information from. And so now we're using two different historians. That's the simplest way to approach that issue. And I think it's the same thing with King Arthur. So they've got a book, a history book, that somebody, maybe 100, 200 years before them, before the pioneers, has written a history book and says, this is what happened with King Arthur, and it's this thing. And they picked up on that, and they thought it matches with their understanding of prophecy, and they went with that. Today, all historians will tell you that that's just bogus. It's not true. King Arthur, if he was real, he wasn't even in this time period. So it's all a problem about the historians that you're going to use and the confidence that we place that when the pioneers were collecting all this information from history, were they correct or were they incorrect? And you and I have the same problem today. When we go through these stories, we're going to go into Wikipedia mostly. Most people go into Wikipedia. And you've got all this information there. You think, is it correct or is it not? So that's all I want to say about King Arthur. I'm inclined to agree with it. But we don't use that as a primary evidence.
Could you explain how we know what verse is talking about when the three horns are being plucked up versus the peace treaty with the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths? Because you said they were applying to the same thing, but how do we know what verse is one? Did I understand that correctly?
Stand up and take away.
So what you're saying?
Stand up and take away. That's what he said. Clovis stands up against the Visigoths, and then Byzantine Empire takes him away. Serves a day.
Okay, so the question that you're asking is specific to verse 31.
Yeah, well, I
Or-
don't know. I was just, based on what Marco said, if they're applying to the same phrase, how do we know what, is it
Okay,
applying
yeah.
it in the same verse, or is it talking also 8 or 11:31 and 12:11? Is it?
So what I'm doing is, if we go back to 12:11 and use 12:11 as our anchor, because it's got a time prophecy connected with it, the 1290, you know that you've got a date here. So we know we've got the date 508. And if you go back into the historical record, 508 isn't connected to the plucking up of the three horns, because they're different dates, they're different events. So you're okay with that logic?
Oh, when were the three horns plucked up? 538.
Let me give you the dates.
Oh, okay. No, if it's a different date, then that
It's
makes
a different
sense.
date.
I don't.
I've got 493.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I get it now. I totally get it. Sorry.
You sure?
I totally
Just
get
say
it.
it.
Yeah.
I'll say it anyway. I'll just finish this because
Okay.
someone else might not have got it. So I've got the Heruli as 493, the Vandals as 534, which is the point that Brother Marco brought up yesterday, that hopefully we'll get to it today, and the Ostrogoths at 538. So they're the 3 dates of the plucking up of the 3 horns, and so let me just get this clear. So the Heruli are actually destroyed by the Ostrogoths. So the Ostrogoths destroyed the Heruli at the behest of pagan Rome. Pagan Rome, a simple way I would explain it is they give them an instruction or permission to come and destroy the Heruli and take their territory. Then the Vandals are taken by pagan Rome, and so are the Ostrogoths. So this is I put the Byzantine Empire.
But that was Clovis, right?
Sorry, what?
That's Clovis that destroys the Vandals.
No. So this is what we want to get. We've got a number of things happening in this history. The reason why we want to try and understand this is because if you're going to make any kind of application, we need to get kind of the history straightened out. And there are 2 powers that are doing a work for the papacy. By the time you get to... one of them is the 7 horns. And the other one is the Byzantine Empire.
Oh, the Vandals and the Visigoths. That's what I got confused. Visigoths.
Okay, yes, so,
and the Vandals.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so we're okay with that. So if we're going to use 1211 to mark 508, if you go back into, 508 isn't any of these, but it's the Visigoths. So these are the Visigoths in 508. And then what we're going to do is we're going to look at the word take away, and the word take away is the same word that's used in 1211 as 1131. So that gives us the ability to say that 1131 is the same history as 1211. But we've got the word take away, and we've also got the word set up here. So set up is in 1211. It's not found in verse 31. So I think the way it was explained a minute ago wasn't quite correct. And the setting up is the same as the place. We know the setting up is 538. So we know that because it says in the verse, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up. So it talks about the abomination that maketh desolate is set up. And the abomination that maketh desolate is what? But what about the papacy?
Combination of church and state.
The mark.
The combination of church and state is the transgression of desolation.
Sunday law.
Yeah, so this is the Sunday law. And we have a Sunday law right in 538. So it's the culmination of the church-state relationship that by the time you get to 538, they have the ability now to do this abomination, to make a Sunday law.
But in 1211, does it mention 538? That would be...
It doesn't mention it, but it says this, and from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, 508, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up.
Is it also 508? Starting... That's why I said when you asked me for
That's why I'm saying, depending on how you read it. So I'm reading set up as marking 538. So there's these 30 years, it's going to be taken away in order that it can be set up. So I'm seeing take away and set up as a period of time that's marking 2 events.
But, I mean, the following sentence it says, because it says then, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,000.
Yeah, so from the time that the daily is taken away, in order that it can be set up, there shall be 1290 days. That's how I'm understanding that passage, because if you're going to do it the way you said, set up, then you're not going to make set up equals place. Because you're going to make set up as 508. If you make set up 508, it's not the same as place, or we're going to change what place means in 1131.
4 set up means a progressive work.
Yes, there is this progression, but I think it's marking the beginning and the end of this progressive work. Because when you're set up, you're placed in your position to do whatever you need to do. He's been set up.
Now, you happen to mention here that maketh desolate is in reference to God's people.
Yeah, he's the desolating power. This is the whole concept that the Millerites have, the two desolating power. So he's the abomination that desolates God's people, which is Daniel 11, so Daniel 8 verse 13.
And why can place not be 538?
Why can't it?
Yeah, or is it?
It is.
It is.
I'm saying place. The way 1131 is structured, to me it gives three discrete histories. It
But
says,
you're saying that place is set up. It's both 538.
yeah.
It cannot. Okay.
That's what I'm saying. If you don't do that, then you don't. Then you've got place on its own, and
Set up.
set up is you're putting set up as 508.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm putting set up as 538.
Yeah.
Brother Marco.
I don't know, perhaps I missed it, but it's the very same word in Hebrew.
What?
It's the same word in Hebrew. I didn't even.
Yeah.
What's the same word? Place
Okay.
and set up?
Yeah. Yes.
Oh.
It's all Hebrew. It's not Aramaic. The Aramaic ends at the end of chapter 7. Let me just have a quick look. Have you just you know that for a fact? So
My wife knows it for a fact.
okay. So it says in 1131.
Yeah, it is. It's age.
5414 in Daniel 11.
54:14. Yeah.
In Daniel 11:31, yes.
And 12:11 is the same. Yeah.
12:11. Yeah.
Yep.
54:14.
Okay. So we have the same word, and I think the way 12:11 reads is this: from the time that the daily is taken away in 508, and in order for the abomination of desolation to be set up in 538, there should be 1290 days. And the reason why I'm saying that is because the setup is connected with the abomination of desolation. And the abomination of desolation we're marking at the beginning of its 1260 rulership. Otherwise you get to the problem that you're going to say transgression of desolation and abomination of desolation is the same thing. But if we're making the distinction, you go into transgression so that you're able to abominate. So it's a progression. And this is the struggle that we're having when we teach this message, that people say the image of the beast and Sunday law are the same thing. But we want to separate them. We want to say, one, it's the beginning of a process. This is Brittany.
I just really quick. In 12:11, the daily are the Visigoths, correct? Is that
The
correct?
daily of the I'm saying they're the same. That it's the same. They're both covering that same history. So, 11. The second part of 1131. The second part of 1131. Take away the daily is the same as 12:11. Take away the daily. They're both the same event, and they're just showing slightly different pieces of information. In 508. And they're the same word. So we've got the same takeaway, the same conclusion. So I think we've got strong evidence to know that 1131, the last two parts is 508 and 538. So the only thing that when it says they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, we can either take that in a generic term, but the reason why I put that as a history, a specific history, is because when we go into 8:11, I know we haven't gone to 8:11, in chapter 8, verse 11, it says, "Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down." So, the place of his sanctuary being cast down, I think is the same event as the pollution of the sanctuary of strength. 8:11, the casting down of the sanctuary, and 11:31, the pollution of sanctuary, the same thing. And in 8:11, we teach that, definitively as 3:30, the casting down of the sanctuary. We mark that as a historical event, and I'm saying it's a parallel. It's a parallel statement. So that's why I'm marking 11:31 as 3:30. When we go through them, I'll lay it out in a sort of table form so that we're clear, because I think some people aren't able to juggle those things in their mind because we're not familiar with it. This is my logic. 12:11 says, take away the daily. That's 508. In 30 years, you're going to set up the abomination that maketh desolate. 538. Those two statements are the same statements as the 11:31, which says, take away the daily and place the abomination of that maketh desolate. We've seen that the place and set up are the same words. We've got a fixed date, 508, from this time prophecy. And so in 11:31, the last two portions are those two events. You can demonstrate that. Then the first part, when it says pollute the sanctuary of strength, I tie that up with Daniel 8:11, where it says, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. So the casting down of his sanctuary is the destruction of Rome, where his sanctuary is. We talk about the Pantheon being the sanctuary, and it says the place of his sanctuary, Rome, where the Pantheon is going to be cast down in, and that gets cast down in 330 AD. So I'm placing that with 1130. Brother Colin.
I was going to say, give you this first mention thing, because I didn't even ask for no proof yesterday, and looking in my concordance, the first mention is Christ's ministration in heaven after me. And because I just assumed that it was Aramaic, why the first mention in Daniel was not the same one as Christ's ministration. But now you're saying that it's not Aramaic, it's Hebrew. If Daniel 8 is Hebrew, then the daily in Daniel 8 Tamid, the first mention is God's ministration.
Let me tackle. You've got a couple of questions. The first thing is, I don't know if we know, but in the book of Daniel, from chapter 1 to chapter 12, does anybody remember? It's chapter 2, verse 3 or 4, I think. Somewhere around there. It's 2. I'll put 3, but I don't think it is 3. Up to 728. All of this section is Aramaic or Chaldean. Let me just see if I can see it in the verse. Then spake the Chaldeans. I think it's, verse 4. I knew it was 3 or 4. It says they spake in Syriac. This is Daniel 2, verse 4. Then spake the Chaldeans to the king in Syriac. And as soon as it does that, everything in the book of Daniel from 2 verse 4 up to the end of chapter 7 is all in Aramaic. And the first part is Hebrew and the last part is Hebrew. So that's one point that you were bringing up. The difference between Aramaic and Hebrew is very, very minor. It's like they're almost the same language, but there are subtle differences. So when you get into anything that's in between chapter 2 and chapter 7, and you want to start proof texting, and you want to go back to the original language, you get into a slight problem, which is what Brother Colife is bringing to view. As an example, when you go to Daniel chapter 2 and you look at the clay, you do a word study on that clay, and the only place you're going to find that word is in the book of Daniel. It's found nowhere else. But when you go to Strong's Concordance, it tells you that it's an Aramaic word. It tells you that, and it tells you what the Hebrew equivalent is. I can't say in every circumstance because I haven't checked every word, but every time I've looked at it, it says HXXX, it says in brackets Aramaic, and then it will tell you the Hebrew equivalent for that. So it's never a problem that it's Aramaic. There must be some reason, I don't know what the reason is, but there must be some prophetic reason, I think, of why it switches from Hebrew to Aramaic. But it does. and people have known that, and I'm not sure why. So that's one issue that you're bringing up. Before we address your question about the daily, because it's a separate discussion, is everybody okay with 11:31 now? And how we get what we get? Sister Bromley.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm just
no.
a tiny bit
Yeah.
confused, and it's probably my lack of understanding. On 12:11, and from the time that the daily shall be taken away, 5:08, and
Yes.
the abomination that makes deathless set up, 5:38,
Yes.
12:90. I don't get that.
This is the problem that Aaron's having as well. Let's try and break that verse. I have real problems when I read the King James and you're trying to explain that to somebody, because when you read it in the King James, it just doesn't seem to work. And I think that's part of the problem that you're having, because it's when you read it, it says, from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, I'll read it as I think you're reading it, which is the time that it's set up shall be 1290. So I don't agree with that. So where do you mark the set up? How do you read the verse when it says take away and set up?
From what we just learned here.
Yeah, so I see them as two separate things. And then when it says there shall be 1290 days, that's taken you back. You've got two options to connect that to. Either you're going to connect it to the setting up, or you're going to connect it to the takeaway. Okay. So I'm connecting that to, I don't know if this is grammatically correct, it probably isn't. If you talk about the subject or the main point of that sentence, it's about the taking away of the daily. That's the main point of this sentence, this verse. And then when it says that something's going to happen, the 1290, I'm connecting that back to the taking away, not back to the setup, which is just above it.
What makes you decide that that's got more weight?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on...
The first sentence, the very beginning of it says, and from the time.
Exactly.
And from the time.
Yeah, but
Why do you think then that they added in that extra date in there? What's the point or the purpose of that?
The setting up.
Setting up of the
Because
abomination.
everything's focusing on the setting up. In many ways, 508 is just isn't the focus of what's happening. It's 538. I mean, we know this 1260 happens. It's a prophecy that's gone 7 times in the Bible, and that's where our focus is. But it's showing you how you get from wherever you're going to go, point A to point B. And one of the important steps to get from the beginning to the end, and the end is 538, how you go from paganism to papalism, one of the key points in history is 508. Now, if we don't understand that correctly, we can't make a present-day application. So we have to see the relationship between these two things. So I think the verse is saying, this is where our focus is, but the important part of this verse is that we need to understand how you get to here. And it's 508.
So it's like a binding off, it's like a point in a period in one way. Because if it's putting both of them in there, that 30 years, it's got a strange thing going on there.
If we could say that Christ's birth and his ministry, that 30-year period is a binding off, then I'd say yes, but I don't know. I don't understand that well enough to say yes, it's the binding off. Sister Brittany.
Could you just quickly say who are the arms again in verse 31?
1131. I'm saying the arms in a generic sense. Let me do a picture. Let me do a picture of Europe. Europe in 538. Yeah. You've got the papacy here. If I did a picture of Europe, it would look a mess. And you've got the Byzantine Empire in the east, and you've got the 7 horns in the west. And when I put pagan Rome here, and people got agitated by this, so I'm going to put the Eastern pagan empire. The reason why I put this as pagan Rome is because this is still run and owned by Caesars. These are real legitimate Caesars, the same, right back to what we would consider to be pagan Rome. So By 538, this is what you've got. Now, you've got this situation actually before 538. Before 538, this situation, this scenario is being constructed. So, from its start back here, where you have just got pagan Rome, from here to here, you get this transition of what Europe is going to look like. So you're going to start off here that pagan Rome is going to own all the territory, and then if we put, say if we put 321 here, in 321, pagan Rome owns the whole of Europe. By the time you get to 538, this is still all pagan Rome, but there's some division, there's some disintegration that's happened. We can see that in the statue, it says Rome divided. Some changes happened. One of the changes that's happened is that all the individual countries that were in here, that had been taken over, they're going to fragment and reassert their independence. So that's what's happening, that their independence that had been taken away in this history is going to be reasserted. So that's why you get all these independent countries all popping up. Plus, you're going to get a change from pagan religion to papal religion. So I understand this division is in two fronts. First of all, there's a national or sovereign division, and then there's this separation between church and state that's being brought to view. So in this time period that you get from here to here, you're going to get these two powers that are supporting the papacy. They're both doing work for the papacy. Before you get to 538 and this situation here, we're going to see that both this power and this power are going to help the papacy rise up. So what I could have done, I could have put another box underneath this and called that 538. So if I did this, and I call this 538, and it's exactly the same as this, I could give this an earlier date. So if I just go, say, let me go from 330 to 538. Let me go that way. So I'm starting in 321, then from 330 to 538, 200 years, you're going to get from here to here. It's going to look like this in this 200-year time period. Then by the time you get to 538, it still looks the same, but now it's looking like that for a different reason, because now Islam is going to start making its presence felt in Europe. So this is the fifth and sixth trumpet. So you need this dynamic here for the fifth and sixth trumpet. But before the fifth and sixth trumpet are going to get involved, you still have this being set up. It takes a while for it to happen. First you get 10, then it goes to 9, then 8, then 7. So you get that going on. Then you get the Visigoths that we've spoken about. You get lots of things. But this power and this power are both armies. So in 1131, when it says arms shall stand on his part, that arms covers the history from 330 to 538, which is, I think, part of the point that Brother Marco was making when he says that they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength. Because over these 200 years, these armies are doing a lot of things. So what I want to see is, in these 200 years, I'm going to pick up 3 discrete histories. I'm going to pick up the start and the end. So we've got the start and the end, and we've got that in 1131. And I want to pick up another one, which is 508. The start and end of the rise. The start and the end of the... So let's go with the start. The start of the papacy. So we're going to start at the papacy, and it's also the start of the papacy. So, we're familiar with an increase of knowledge. So this increase, if we think of it here, this is the papacy. It's going to start here in 330, and it's going to be fully accomplished by 538. So that's what the papacy is doing. But pagan Rome is going to start in the same history. So when they start, they're up here, and they're going to start going down. So it's a rise and a fall of a nation. So the start and the end of the rise of a nation and the fall of a nation happen concurrently at the same time. And the 3 important dates are 330, which is where you start this issue, 538 when you finish it, and 508, because 508 is connected to these 7 horns, where the resistance of paganism finally just gets settled. And I think Brother Mark explained it really well when he said that. That's what 508 is doing. And I want to add King Arthur in as well, because I like King Arthur.
So it would be Justinian would be that on the Eastern Kingdom, right?
So right here is Justinian. Right here
Eastern Rome?
on Eastern Rome. So let me put Eastern Rome here, Byzantine Empire. No, let me. You're asking a slightly different question. So you're pointing it back up here, yeah.
Yes.
So it ends with Justinian here, and it begins with Constantine. So this is the story of how you transfer from Constantine to Justinian. And what would that teach you? That Justinian and Constantine are the same person, prophetically, yeah? Because they're going to be doing the same thing. It's the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. So all the characteristics that we see about Constantine, we see the same things with Justinian. And you get Sunday laws in both of their reigns. You get the first Sunday law and then the second one. And so there's much to understand. I'm not saying I understand it all about those two men. So that's one part of your question.
Okay, then Clovis would be that on the 7 horn side.
Then Clovis is here. And Clovis, he does many things, but the primary thing is he's going to break the back of paganism in 508. So that's the main thing he's going to do. But Constantine to Justinian, they're doing something that's slightly different. Constantine's going to begin this giving of the empire to the papacy, and Justinian's going to finish it off. And in the midst of that, those 3 horns are taken down.
Wouldn't it be easier to say stand on his part and take away? Because the Byzantine Empire, they actually do all of the taking away.
So stand on his part. So we're going to 11:30. It says, arms shall stand on his part. Yeah.
So Clovis stands up and other armies stand up. But the Byzantine Empire actually do the taking away.
All I'm doing is I'm picking up in the verse in 11:31. It says, arms shall stand on his part. And it says 3 things. That is twice. They shall pollute the sanctuary of strength and shall take away the daily. And it says, and they shall place the abomination of desolation. So those armies, I think, are covering both of these people, which is, I think, what is that what you're saying? Or, yeah. So the armies, I'm saying, at the beginning of the verse, it says armies are going to do a lot of things for it, and those armies are these 2 armies here, which is just pagan Rome in its most foundational level.
And that's why it says a plural.
Yeah, I'm saying it's a plural because it's going to identify Clovis. It's going to identify the 7 horns, Clovis, and the Byzantine Empire. Which is different to 8:12. 8:12 it says an host, singular. And that's just talking about Clovis in 8:12. I had a lot of hands up and I didn't think I got to everybody. Maybe the questions got answered.
So the arms are the 7 horns and the Byzantine Empire.
Together in this verse, because they're both going to do some work.
And this verse is saying that these 2 groups of people are going to accomplish the next 3 things from 3:30 to 5:38.
Yeah. And what is it that they're going to accomplish?
Those 3 things.
Yeah, but what are the 3? And I don't mean the dates, but what are they actually accomplishing?
Pollute, remove, and place.
The papacy, sir?
They pollute, remove, and place.
Yes, so they're the discrete things. But if you just step back, what they're doing is they're going to show you how you get the transfer from pagan to papal Rome. So it's going from pagan Rome to the papacy, and it's going to show you how that's done. So their role, their prophetic purpose in life, is to transfer the title or the power, however you want to describe it, from pagan to papal Rome. That's their purpose, and this verse tells you how it's done in those discrete steps. So their purpose is to take you from paganism to papalism.
Can you repeat the 3 steps again?
Someone else can.
I know, I heard Bronwyn.
Sister Bronwyn.
Pollute, take away, and place. These 2 powers pollute, take away, and place. That's their job of their work.
Pollute, take away and place. And do you know the dates of those, Sister Alison?
Yeah. 508 was
We do it in order. Pollute.
pollute.
330.
Yeah, 330.
Take away.
Take away. I'm doing it. 508.
508. And place.
In places 530.
538.
But
Yeah.
can you just repeat? It's they're transferring the title from papal Rome to.
Well, somewhere in the book of, somewhere in Daniel 11, you're going to, the papacy is called the King of the North. And somewhere in the book of Daniel, chapter 11, pagan Rome's called King of the North. So there's going to be a transfer, at least that title, there's going to be a transfer from the two empires, from this division from pagan Rome to papal Rome. And this is what this verse is covering. It's covering how that transfer happens in 200 plus years.
Okay.
Who plucked up the Heruli?
Who plucked up the Heruli? The Ostrogoths. But it's at the behest of the Byzantine Empire. It's at the behest of pagan Rome. They were just like a puppet.
What is that word?
At their request.
Oh,
If you at their behest, they made a request.
who's behest?
Byzantine Empire. So this is the Ostrogoths, and it's they tell them to go ahead and do that for their own purposes. So the Ostrogoths become like a tool or a puppet.
It's almost like permission.
Yes, it's permission. Yeah.
Is this Constantine and I'm
Which one?
in 330, and then Justinian 538 on the bottom when you're
Yes.
using-
Yes. So I put Constantine here, and Justinian. Sorry.
I thought he was 321.
So what's the relationship between 321 and 330? From your
I actually don't know because I know
Okay.
I know you were saying this for 321 was Constantine and Justinian was 330, but you were saying they're the same person doing the same thing, and I didn't understand that.
Okay, so there's a couple of things. So let's go with the relationship between 321 to 330. Sister Bronwyn, you were saying. I heard you say something.
Cause and effect. I was just saying.
Cause and effect.
That's what you said
So
yesterday.
we'll go with cause and effect. Who else said something? Brother Colin said something. What were you saying? 321, 330.
That's the same thing.
Cause and effect. Well, what's the history of those two things? What's the events?
So
It's
it's
a
a
national
apostasy
National.
Yeah.
So we've got Sunday law,
Yeah.
and we've got what's happening in 330.
The Pantheon of Rome was destroyed.
Okay, so nothing's actually destroyed. He moves from Rome to Constantine. And so you're going to say national apostasy follows national ruin. I don't know how to spell ruin. R-U-N?
Yeah. R-R-U-I-N.
Yeah. Brother Marco, did you say something? Constantinople, yeah. From Rome to Constantinople, there's nothing materially happening in Rome.
So why is that the pollution of the sanctuary of strength?
Because he says, I don't like my house anymore. I'm moving.
It was dirty. He wanted a new house. It's pretty American.
What I think is happening is this. Not in real life. Okay, this is kind of like an imaginary story. He makes a Sunday law here, and he realizes he's in severe trouble now because he's broken the law. And what he's doing, he's absconding, he's running away because he knows something's about to happen. So there's various ways of kind of imagining what's happening, but the pollution of this sanctuary means that in his mind, it becomes a worthless place to live. He wants to go to a better place. Constantinople.
Do we know the history, the reason why they made this here move from Rome to Constantinople?
No. As far as I don't know. I don't know it's well documented that what the reason... Obviously, he must be thinking that it's a strategic move, that he wants to strengthen the empire. But in that very move of strengthening the empire, he actually weakens it. But prophetically speaking, we know why he moves. Prophetically, we know why he moved.
And what wasn't Justinian like way later than this?
Yes. So,
Okay,
okay, so the second part of your question. So, 321, he makes a Sunday law. Trouble's about to ensue now because the trumpets are going to begin to blow. And so he runs away so he doesn't get trouble. So he's going to be out of trouble now and he's going to be free to carry on living and not have any problems. So the problem's going to be focused in the city of Rome. So he gets out of that. So that's the causal relationship. National apostasy follows national ruin. The reason why I said Constantine and Justinian are the same is because there's a Sunday law in his time period and there's a Sunday law in his time period. So this Sunday law and this Sunday law are related. We know they're related. And both of them are working on behalf of the church. So they both entering into a church-state relationship because he makes a national religion of Christianity and Justinian's going to do a very similar work. So 538. Not just literally at 538. I'm not making that point. I'm just saying within his reign.
Okay.
So one thing that
Symbolizing that they do the same thing.
they basically do the same thing. There's they enter into this church-state relationship for different reasons, but they're both typifying the beginning and the end of this period of time. They're both emperors. They're both involved with Sunday laws. They both have a church-state relationship. So there's a relationship between these two kings. That's what I meant. They're the same person.
So that leads me to my next question.
Okay.
Why don't we start that whole history from 321?
Because depending on the point you want to make is, so if we're going to talk about Sunday laws, then we talk 321 to 538. Yeah? That's 321. But if you're going to talk about how the empire comes to its destruction, how it begins to break out, you'd go to 330 and you might very well go to just 508. Because 508 is where paganism finally just gets crushed. And all that's going to happen now is it's just going to take 30 years for things to get tidied up. So by 508, the battle between paganism and papalism has already been won and lost. It's already whatever's going to happen is already been decided by 508. So 508, when you talk about the transfer of the empire, he leaves the city of Rome, and by 508, paganism is done and dusted. It's already sorted out what's going to happen. So depending on which perspective you're looking at, if you're looking from religion, or if you're looking from, I don't know, political
power.
But 508, remember, which is what Sister Bronwyn was saying, which now I'm thinking about, I'm saying, maybe it is a good way of saying it. Because 508 to 538 marks the Visigoths to the last horn. And in this time period, there's a setting up that's going on, but it's finally set up by 538. So that's where we get these different dates. So I think the dates that you were asking about is 21 and 30. Why is one 21 and why is 30? And why am I using 30 here and not 21? Is because 21 is this issue about the Sunday laws, but we're talking about how empires rise and fall. And it's unless we conceptualize this whole idea about progression, we get into a mess because things won't work out. We have to see this progressive nature, and we know that about our own history. When we go from 9/11 to the Sunday law, if we don't see the progressive nature of that fall of the United States, nothing makes sense. So when we get Revelation 13 verses 1 to 3, we mark that at 9/11, and everyone in the church marks it at the Sunday law. So we say, there's a big difference between 9/11 and the Sunday law. Then you have to defend and explain why that is, because people will say 18 verse 2, Babylon hasn't fallen at 9/11. The world's still in existence, everything's still okay. But we'll say what we're trying to mark is at 9/11 is what? The threefold union is fully formed, And then we're going to justify why nothing has happened. And why do we justify nothing's happened at 9/11? Sorry? Yeah, but what's caused that? Islam. So Islam is the factor that helps us to explain when we say 9/11. So if we have 9/11 to the Sunday law, the reason we say 18:1-3 and 18 verse 4, and so we're putting Babylon is fallen here, besides all the the prophetic waymarks that you're going to line this up with the first of the first month and go back to April the 19th, is that we're saying this is when it all should have happened, but then we have to explain why we get this discrepancy, because the church wants to put all of this here, and we're showing the progressive nature of that, and our explanation is Islam. You could go to Revelation 7 and talk about the sealing, but the reason why we're going to make this distinction is because it all should have really happened here, but the brakes get put on as this process begins, and what was supposed to be just a single event actually becomes this slow, long, drawn-out process. So everything about our message has to be explained from the perspective of progression. If we don't see that, part of the problem that you're expressing is that these dates and places don't seem to make sense, and we don't see the connection between them. We don't see the connection because we're so educated or trained to just look at things that have happened at a point in time, one-off. So everybody focuses on 538, the 1260, but nobody looks at the preamble, the history before that. And it's that history before that which helps us to explain what's going on here.
So once we understand now the religious line and the political line, can we mark the 1290 as the political line and the 1260 as the religious line?
When I was doing this, I thought I might get myself into a mess, because by 538, remember, which you're saying is the religious, you've also got a political, because you've got the last horn. So I don't know I don't know if I can cleanly separate the two. So I knew I'd get into a mess with that, and that's why I had 508. But the problem with 508 is that's the Visigoths, and you've still got two horns to deal with afterwards, but the two horns that is a religious warfare. We think about it being political, but it is a religious issue between these two factions of Catholicism and Arianism.
We have also, it's another topic about the kingdom of grace and the kingdom of glory. We have this, it's instituted and it's established.
Yeah.
It's two same words. They mean, in definition, the same thing, but we place them in a different place. So can we not say that you have a place and a setup? It's exactly the same, but still it can be pointed at.
Take away and set up.
You mean take away and set up? Take away and set up.
No, you
Oh.
have the placing in 1131.
Yeah.
And
It's the same.
and the setup, it's the same word.
Yes.
But here we say it's 538
And there we say it's 5.
5.
I say it's 538.
No, but you can say, I mean, it's instituted, established, set up, place. It's the same thing, but it emphasizes something, a different place. I mean,
I'm not trying to railroad anybody into thinking the way I do, but you can see that Brother Arion's seen verse 11 slightly differently, and it's okay to.
verse 11 and 12, it shouts 508. That's the message of these two verses.
Yep.
What, isn't it just
Of which verses?
11 and 12.
Yes.
That's
Oh,
what
verse
we-
11 and 12.
Well, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Basically,
No, verse 12.
1335.
Same start point.
Okay.
So, I mean,
isn't
of course it says 1798 and 1843, but
I think to make it easy, it's just take away place, take away setup. It's that simple.
Take away,
Place. In 31 it's
take away place,
yeah.
take away setup.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's how I understand that.
Like you're trying to flip the place and the setup and figure these things, just take away. in place, and then take away and set up. Easy. 30 years in between.
Unless it's a time prophecy,
But
then you've got to ask
The
yourself
timeline.
why there's 30 years in there.
But then,
Unless it's a time prophecy, which it is.
Brother Marco.
it doesn't take
Oh.
anything though. What does he do to alter it?
I don't know.
But the thing is, if you read 12:11 that way, then the 12:9 it reads different.
It does. It breaks. It does.
What's the point there? I missed that.
No, it's just repetition of what we discussed.
Okay. So so I'm saying verses 11 and 12 are focusing on 508 because there's something significant that's happening there. But it's always leading us to the setup. So I'm saying the setup is, I'm saying this. Setup is here. And I'm not objecting. No, I'm just saying that that's set up, and I'm saying it's take away here. And I'm reading that verse is you take away in order to set up. You take away in order to set up.
I'm sorry.
Don't say sorry, please.
I don't mean to change the subject slightly. Daniel 8:11, is that a chronological verse? Because if the data is taken away in 508, and the sanctuary strength was polluted in 330, or is there another?
Mostly, I think it is chronological. I'd have to go back into it.
How though? Was there another?
Okay, I'm not
Like
gonna.
what?
Yeah, so I'm not gonna let you change the subject.
Okay.
Because to explain it, we'd have to look in a bit more detail. What I'm concerned about is that often.
But is that the same? Is this place of his sanctuary being cast down the same as the pollution of the sanctuary?
Yes. So yeah, I think I did say that. So I'm going to do this. 1131 A, B, C. This is the sanctuary, take away, and place. And I'm going to connect these two to 1211, where it says take away, and it says set up. And then this one, the first part, I'm connecting this to 811, where it says the sanctuary.
But how is it chronological?
Yeah, so I'm not going to address the chronology because the point I was going to just make was when we gloss over the words, everything sort of fits. But as soon as you start saying, well, let's look at verse 11 here in a bit more detail, you begin to see people get a bit shaky on the words because we don't really read them. So I don't want to just sort of just give you, bang, 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 3 dates or whatever, or events in 8:11. Then you end up writing it down, but you'd never be able to explain it. So,
Will we go over that?
yes, so Sis Bromley asked us to, and I said I didn't want to, but I think we will, because it's probably a worthwhile exercise. Brother Jonathan.
Yeah, sorry. Another thought for Daniel 12:11. If I just read this verse, it says, "And from that time," and now it tells me an event that the daily sacrifice shall taken away. And for me now, it gives me a further event that takes place at that time in 508, and it says, "Okay, the daily shall taken away, and the abomination shall be is set up." So, for me, it's hard to see. I see your point with 538 because it's the same words in the Hebrew, but it's still hard for me to see 538 in this verse.
So
Because just from reading it's an event, and to this event in 508 it adds another information what takes also place in 508.
What I find interesting is if we had just glossed over this and I would have just put the dates in, everybody said it all looks good. And now you're actually being encouraged to read it. You see the wording isn't that straightforward. And that's part of the problem that we got into yesterday when we looked at verse 30, 11:30, that you think you know what these verses are saying. And when you start reading them, you think, do they actually mean what they say? So maybe we need to think about it a bit more, but I'm saying how I read that. I'm saying if you take the second part of the verse out, it says, from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, there's going to be 1290 days. Straightforward. And then it goes into verse 12, where you're going to get, I don't want to say this to confuse anything, but here, then you're going to go 1335 and to get to 1843. So that's 11 and 12. And the way I'm reading the second part, it says, and the abomination that maketh desolate, I'm not connecting that to this event here, but it can read that way. It can read that way. In the same way, when we read 8:12, it says, I think it says, by reason of transgression in the King James. 8:12 says, and the host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression. Now, we just skipped over, and I saw it when it happened in class. It says transgression of desolation. So it just says by reason of transgression, and then you talk about transgression of desolation and the abomination of desolation. Everybody was okay with those two things. But if I said, can you explain what it means by reason of transgression? If you start thinking about the words, you get problems. Then you think I have to go back to the original, see why did they translate it that way? Because it doesn't make any sense to me, at least, when I just read it, because I can't even explain what it means by reason of transgression. So what was in transgression? Who was transgressing? It leaves it wide open to, some kind of interpretation. And I think the same problem for me is happening in verse 11. When it says, and the abomination that maketh desolate. When it says, and the abomination that maketh desolate, I'm changing that. So I'm telling you, I'm changing it to say, in order that. So I'm changing the and. So maybe I should have said this right from the outset. I'm changing and I'm saying that it means in order that. So if you put that in there, Brother Jonathan, put it in order that, then how would you read the verse?
From the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away in order that the abomination makes the...
So as soon as you change it that, you're gonna agree with what I'm doing here, then, aren't you? If you change that and in order that, from this time, something's going to happen so that something else can happen. And that's what I've done to that verse. I've changed it. I've changed the and into in order that, or so that something can happen in the future, something's going to happen now. So you need to work out, do I have the legitimacy to do that? Okay, so we've got a couple more questions, but we're running out of time, over time.
In Daniel 8, when he says, the transgression of desolation and the daily give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot. The sanctuary and the host are both not trodden underfoot for 2,300 days. The sanctuary isn't trodden underfoot for 2,300 days because they're going to build it back in whatever it was, 538 or whenever, 536 or whatever. The point is, it's similar. You can see two things are happening. They don't necessarily need to start at the same time. The sanctuary wasn't trodden underfoot at 677. Even though the host or Manasseh wasn't earnest, the host began to be trodden underfoot. So it's the same. So how can we the same logic you would use to know what's happening in Daniel 8:14? It would be the same logic you would apply for Daniel 11:31 and Daniel 12:11. You're seeing within the verse different things happening from a certain point in time.
Problem that you're faced with is when you read it in the King James, it doesn't read that way. Sister Tamina.
I was just going to say, as soon as the data is taken away, the setting up starts, right? So
Yeah.
508, it does start. That's what it refers to in Daniel 12:11 probably, but we do mark it in 538 because there it's like the complete.
Yes.
So it's a progression.
So when I say in order that it's going to be set up, I'm saying there's a setting up that's going on here.
Yeah,
Everybody's agreeing that there's some kind of setting up, but it's where you mark the word set up. And if you're going to mark the word set up here, I don't think it's correct. But I have to change the way that it reads to do that. So I'm saying And I'm going to change it into order so that something can happen in the future. Christ is born so that he can begin his ministry. Because he doesn't begin his ministry here. He sets it, there's a setting up. So, because this is the time period of Christ, 30 years preparation to 1260. He's born here and he begins his ministry here. Sister Bronwyn.
So if the second 1290 ends in 1818, because it could be read if you're allowed to.
Sorry,
do
the
that.
second.
1290, because if there's two, and from the time, and it gives to the daily and the abomination that made it desolate, if we agree they both start at different times, and one prophecy ends in 1798, one ends in 1818.
No, I think there's only one 1290. Is there? You put in 1290?
No, I'm asking.
Oh, I never
I mean,
even.
it seems
I never
like,
looked at that verse that way.
I mean, that's what I'm reading. Because I don't know if you choose to change and to an order that. I don't know. I'm struggling with it.
But
1828.
Is that when it would end? From 1798, what, 30 years up?
Oh,
There's a 30-year discrepancy, right?
Yeah, if it's 1828, then I'm going to say that I don't think you can do that. 1818 sounded nice because it's things happened in 1818, but 1828, I'm going to say no to 1898.
Okay, yeah.
So
I'm just saying that's the logic that it looks like, whatever date that it ends on.
what's the difference?
But in English, when you have two commas, you can take the portion that's between the two commas away and read the sentence as it is.
Okay.
And usually between two commas is just added information, is my understanding. So you can totally see that it's referring to at the time that the daily is taken away because of the comma after away and the comma after set up.
So that's what I did before,
Okay.
but we'd get into trouble if we become grammatical historicists
saying.
by your teaching. I'm going to
English,
tell that you're, that
It's
you're
a
doing that.
detail.
Parminder.
We're way over time. We have to be.
The first
we have to
sentence
be
and the
strict.
last sentence combined. And that's what you do in English.
So we didn't get to where I wanted to get to. I thought we'd get to it today. I want to explain verse 30, but we didn't get there today. We'll pick that up on Monday. I'm away from the week for the weekend now. So Sunday morning's class, Elder Jeff will be taking. She'll be back for Monday. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your loving kindness and goodness towards us. We ask and pray that you would be with us and bless us. Help us, Father, to grapple with your word. Help us to spend time studying these things so that they become our own, so that we don't become the voice piece of another man, that we begin to conceptualize and understand these things for ourselves. We know that these things are so important, Lord, that we will not be moved when we're individually tested. Be with us and bless us now, we pray and ask in the name of Jesus. Amen.